If you have done something wrong, you have made a mistake, and somebody makes you ashamed of it and guilty, you run around licking the sores of your wounded ego because you feel your pride has been hurt. The first thing to understand is that it is not a serious failing in a human being to make mistakes. Everybody has to make mistakes. There is no way out of it. You cannot learn anything unless you make mistakes. Regard yourself as a cloud in the flesh. Clouds never make mistakes. Did you ever see a cloud that was misshapen? Did you ever see a badly designed wave? No. They always do the right thing. But if you will treat yourself for a while as a cloud or a wave and realize that you cannot make a mistake whatever you do, because even if you do something that appears totally disastrous, it will all come out in the wash somehow or another. Forgiveness is one of those words we often hear, yet seldom understand. We think of it as a moral command, an obligation to be kind, to turn the other cheek, to release someone else from blame. But have you noticed that most of the time the hardest person to forgive is yourself? You carry the weight of mistakes long after they're gone. You replay old conversations like broken records, punishing yourself again and again for something that has already passed. You clutch guilt like a stone in your pocket, believing that if you hold it tightly enough, you will somehow undo what has already been done. But guilt is a misunderstanding of time. The past is gone. It cannot be edited, cannot be erased. All that remains is the story you continue to tell yourself about it. And that story is where the suffering lies. Forgiving yourself does not mean that what happened was right, or that it should be repeated. It means you stop insisting that you should have been other than you were at that moment. For at that moment, with the knowledge and awareness you had, you could not have acted differently. The illusion that you should have known better is always created after the fact, when you stand in the present and look back at yourself with new eyes. To forgive yourself is not to give permission for carelessness, but to recognize that mistakes are woven into the fabric of being alive. A child learns to walk by falling. No one condemns him for stumbling. Why then, when you stumble as an adult, do you treat yourself with such cruelty? It is as if you imagine that growth should come without error, that wisdom should come without foolishness. But what is wisdom except the ripening of countless errors, understood at last for what they were? The world, too, is guilty in your eyes. Nations betray, friends lie, strangers act with cruelty, and everywhere there seems to be a reason to harden your heart. Yet notice something. What you despise most in others is often a reflection of what you struggle with within yourself. The impatience, the arrogance, the selfishness. You recognize them because they are part of your own experience. To forgive the world, then, is to recognize that every human being is caught in the same web of ignorance, fear, and conditioning. They act as you have acted, blinded by the same fog you too have stumbled through. This does not mean you excuse harm or that injustice should be ignored. It means you understand that people rarely act from clarity. They act from pain. They act from wounds that are invisible. When you see this, the heart softens, not into blind acceptance, but into understanding. And understanding is the root of forgiveness. Forgiveness, you see, is not a transaction. It is not balancing the books of who was right and who was wrong. As long as you keep a ledger, you are still a prisoner of the past. Forgiveness is forgetting the score, abandoning the very game of keeping accounts. It is saying, this moment is new, it owes nothing to the past. When you do this, you release not only others, but yourself. It takes courage to do this. We are trained to clutch our wounds, to protect our pride, to demand repayment for our suffering. But life is not a courtroom, it is a river. If you refuse to let go, you are the one who drowns. When you forgive, you do not rewrite history. You release yourself from its chains. You say, yes, it happened, but I will not carry it forward. I choose to live now. And so, forgiveness is not something you do once. It is something you practice daily, like breathing. Each time guilt or resentment arises, you notice it, you let it pass, you refuse to bind yourself to it. Slowly, you discover that forgiveness is not really about others at all. It is about your own freedom. The deepest act of forgiveness is to stop insisting that life should have been different than it was. Life unfolded exactly as it did, and you are the result of it. Every mistake, every wound, every joy and sorrow has shaped you. If you can see this, you will find that forgiveness is not a duty, but a kind of gratitude. Gratitude that life is messy, unpredictable, and yet still astonishingly beautiful. So perhaps the real question is not how to forgive yourself or the world, but whether you are willing to stop fighting with what has already been. Forgiveness is not fixing the past. It is falling in love with the present. And when you do, you discover a freedom so profound that the very idea of resentment begins to feel absurd. Guilt is one of the most peculiar habits of the human mind. It is like carrying a heavy bag filled with stones, each stone a memory of something you wish you had done differently. You drag it everywhere, convinced that by holding on to it, you are somehow paying a debt to life. Yet if you look closely, guilt is nothing more than a refusal to let time be what it is. The past is no longer here. It has dissolved like smoke, and yet you cling to its ghost, repeating the story again and again as if rehearsal could change the ending. The strange thing about guilt is that it always arises after the fact. You never feel guilty in the exact moment of action. You act with the awareness and the resources you have at that time. The guilt only appears when you stand in the present, equipped with new knowledge, and look back at your old self as if you should have known better. But how could you? To demand that your past self act with the wisdom of your present self is absurd. It is like scolding a child for not being an adult. It is a trick of the mind, and one that creates endless suffering. This is why guilt is such a misunderstanding of time. It assumes that the past can be corrected through emotional self-punishment, but no matter how many times you replay the memory, no matter how much shame you attach to it, the event itself remains untouched. You cannot alter what has already happened. What you can alter is the meaning you give it now. You can choose to see it not as a scar to be hidden, but as part of the pattern of your unfolding. A misstep, yes, but one that belongs to the dance of your life just as much as the graceful moments. Think of how we treat the mistakes of children. When a child falls while learning to walk, we do not condemn him for his clumsiness. We smile, we encourage, we understand that falling is part of walking. But as we grow older, we forget this mercy. We stumble in life, in love, in work, in choices, and instead of kindness, we turn on ourselves with harsh judgment. We treat ourselves as though we should have been flawless, as though falling were no longer part of the process. Yet falling remains the only way to learn. Guilt, then, is the refusal to see mistakes as part of growth. It is holding onto the fall rather than recognizing the step it enabled. To forgive yourself, you must see time as it really is, a river that only flows forward. You cannot swim back upstream, you cannot return to redo the past. What you can do is release the stones you have been carrying and step fully into the present, lighter, freer, ready to move on. Forgiveness begins with this understanding, that guilt has nothing to do with reality and everything to do with a story the mind keeps telling about time. There is a deep confusion many people carry when it comes to forgiving themselves. They believe that to forgive themselves would mean they are letting themselves off too easily, that they are giving permission to repeat the same mistake again. It feels almost dishonest, as though self-forgiveness were a kind of loophole in morality. And so, instead of forgiving, they cling to punishment, believing that shame is a form of responsibility. But shame is not responsibility, it is paralysis. It does not move you forward, it keeps you locked in the same room, staring at the same walls, telling the same story over and over. Forgiveness of the self is not about saying, it didn't matter, or it was fine. It is not an excuse. To forgive yourself is to recognize that the mistake happened, that it had consequences, and yet that it does not define the whole of who you are. You are not a single action, you are not a single choice. You are the entire unfolding of a life, and within that unfolding there will be brilliance and there will be folly. To reduce yourself to only your errors is as false as reducing yourself only to your successes. When you forgive yourself, you are not condoning the action. You are liberating the person behind the action. You are saying, yes, I was mistaken, Yes, I failed, but I am not frozen in that moment forever. I am capable of change. I am more than my errors. That is not permission. It is the very foundation of growth. If you do not forgive yourself, you remain identified with your worst moments, as though you were condemned to wear them forever. And when you live like that, you are far more likely to repeat them because your identity has been reduced to them. Consider this: when a prisoner is released, they have a chance to begin again. But imagine if the prison doors never opened, if the sentence was eternal. That is what unforgiveness is, a life sentence handed down by your own mind. Self-forgiveness is not about denying that you did wrong, but about opening the prison door and walking out into possibility again. Liberation comes in seeing that mistakes are not signs of permanent failure, but evidence of being alive. Only someone who is trying, who is reaching, who is willing to risk, will make mistakes. To live without error would mean never to move, never to risk, never to learn. If you see this, you will understand that self-forgiveness is the most honest relationship you can have with yourself. It is saying, I was wrong, but I will not remain wrong. I am free to continue. And in that freedom, a new kind of responsibility arises. The responsibility to grow, to change, to live more wisely. Forgiveness of yourself, then, is not the end of morality, but the beginning of maturity. It is the refusal to be held hostage by your past, and the courage to step forward unchained. When you look at the world, it is tempting to divide it into those who are guilty and those who are innocent, those who deserve punishment and those who deserve mercy. We hold tightly to our grievances, pointing outward and saying, they are the reason I suffer. They are the ones who have ruined things. But if you look deeply enough, you begin to see that what irritates you most in others is often a reflection of something unresolved within yourself. The world becomes a mirror, and the faces that anger you most are often showing you the parts of your own humanity you do not wish to see. You notice someone's arrogance, their selfishness, their carelessness, and immediately you condemn them. Yet the very fact that you recognize it so quickly means you have known it yourself. It may have been a fleeting impulse, a shadow thought, or a behavior you now regret, but it exists in you. To forgive the world, then, is not merely an act of generosity toward others. It is the acceptance of your shared humanity. It is acknowledging that we are all stumbling through the same fog of fear, desire, and ignorance, trying in our clumsy ways to find peace, love, or survival. There is a strange comfort in realizing this, for when you see the flaws of others not as personal attacks upon you, but as expressions of their own pain and confusion, something softens. Anger turns into understanding, not because the harm was unreal, but because you see the person behind the act. Their cruelty was their blindness, their betrayal was their fear, their indifference was their exhaustion. You know these states because you too have acted from them. This does not mean you must accept injustice or allow harm to continue. Boundaries, truth, and justice all have their place. But forgiveness is a different matter. It is the recognition that beneath the surface of every harmful act is a human being caught in the very same struggles you have faced in your own heart. To forgive the world is not to ignore its wounds, but to see them for what they are, echoes of your own. And when you forgive the world, something remarkable happens. You begin to forgive yourself more deeply. The separation between me and them starts to dissolve. The same compassion you extend outward returns to you. For if they were blind and you can forgive them, then so too must you have been blind when you faltered, and you deserve the same mercy. In truth, the act of forgiving others and the act of forgiving yourself are not two separate gestures, but one continuous movement of the heart. They rise together like the inhale and the exhale of breath. To forgive the world is to see yourself in it. To forgive yourself is to recognize the world in you. They cannot be separated, because ultimately there is no true boundary between the two. There is only one shared human story with all its stumbles, all its wounds, and all its longing to be whole. One of the greatest obstacles to forgiveness is the habit of keeping score. The mind acts like a bookkeeper, tallying every injury, every insult, every betrayal. It is as though we walk through life with invisible ledgers, recording who owes us an apology, who owes us kindness, who owes us love. And so long as we hold onto these ledgers, forgiveness remains impossible, because forgiveness is not a matter of balancing the account. It is the refusal to keep one at all. When you keep score, every interaction becomes a transaction. You gave, and therefore you expect something in return. You suffered, and therefore you believe life or another person must make it up to you. But life is not a business contract. It does not settle debts. It does not promise repayment. The more tightly you hold on to this sense of cosmic accounting, the more bitter you become, because reality rarely obeys the numbers you have written down. To truly forgive is to abandon the very idea of accounting. It is to drop the ledger entirely. This does not mean you deny that wrong was done. It means you no longer bind yourself to the endless arithmetic of blame. Imagine how heavy the mind becomes when it carries not only its own mistakes, but the perceived mistakes of everyone else. You wake each morning already burdened, measuring the world by the scales of fairness, and yet fairness itself is often a story you have told yourself, because what seems unfair to you might appear entirely different from another angle. Forgiveness, then, is a kind of amnesia, not the forgetfulness of memory, but the forgetfulness of the score. It is remembering the event but refusing to carry the tally forward. It is saying, yes, this happened, but I will not make it the currency of my relationship with you or with life itself. In this way, forgiveness is not about erasing history. It is about releasing yourself from the compulsion to keep turning history into a debt. Think of a friendship where grievances are kept alive, where every slight is remembered and every failure recalled. Such a friendship cannot breathe. It suffocates under the weight of memory. But when both friends drop the score, the relationship is free to begin anew in each moment. Life itself is like this. If you keep score against life, demanding that it should have given you more happiness, more success, more love, you remain in constant conflict with reality. But if you stop tallying, if you accept that life owes you nothing, then everything it gives becomes a gift. This is the essence of true forgiveness. It is not fairness, it is freedom. The freedom to meet the present moment without dragging the burden of old numbers behind you. The freedom to let go of the accountant in the mind and discover something far more precious than just peace.